Fresno Bee way back in '73 when I wrote it. But it's a history of agricultural labor in California. You know, it includes the Okies, the
Yeah.
Filipinos, all of that, and it's the history of that. And then the next one is it was Caesar's funeral. Some came to praise Caesar while others stood far away. It was his funeral.
Did you go?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then, and the strawberry pickers shall lead. It's another one. When I was up in Monterey, the strawberry pickers went on strike.
Oh.
Okay. And so that article deals with that. And then labor unions in the 70s, that's a good background for you. Labor movement, because the UFW is a labor movement. But when the AFL-CIO was created and Congress passed the collective bargaining law, they specifically excluded agricultural labor because there were so many senators from the deep south.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to do that. So farm labor was never covered by the National Labor Relations Act, which allowed employees to organize and form unions. Agriculture was excluded. So it wasn't until Caesar tried it that after that, the AFL-CIO was feeling guilty, so they brought him in as an affiliate of the AFL-CIO. That was, during Caesar's time. So then they became part of the labor movement. And that's really how they won the grape strike. The boycott wasn't really won, certainly not in this area. And it was won in other parts of the United States because labor unions supported it by boycotting
Okay,
markets.
I'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Hi.
Yeah, boycotting markets, and then Europe, the European countries that are very labor, they refused to take the grapes off the ships, or they took them off and dumped them in the water.
They weren't
Like
selling
that.
them.
Tea
Like the tea party, yeah. And that's eventually what got the growers to the table to negotiate. It was the boycott out of this area, because
I'm sure.
Ronald Reagan was governor at the time, and I was in the legislature, and he made a point of buying grapes, for the state hospitals and the prisons and all that kind of stuff, trying to support the growers. He even bought a case of grapes for every one of the members of the legislature. And they put them in front of our doors, the office, and we went and dumped them in front of his office.
Wow.
We did,
Yeah.
I mean, he was trying to be slick,
Wow.
So anyway, these three or four chapters, you can follow them. Start with the history one. That'll give you. California labor agriculture has never been really family farm. They call it family farm. It's family farms that have 6,000 acres. It's not like the Midwest where they have 100 acres or so. Family farms here, like the Jamaros, the Giorgios, Kavakoviches, I mean, those guys, they're family corporations.
Yeah.
That's what they are. So agribusiness in California has always depended on cheap labor. They've always seen to it that somebody was brought in that was poorer and hungrier than the local residents, and they were the ones that ended up in the labor camps. The Grapes of Wrath is the story of agricultural labor here, but it was the whites coming from Oklahoma and Arkansas. Basically, just like the Filipinos have come, just like the Mexicans have come, they were enticed over here by the growers that went when they were having the Dust Bowl period over there, and they were, getting kicked off the land as sharecroppers. The big farmers here went over there and advertised, "Come pick oranges in California for $3 a crate." Well, they swamped the labor market, and when they got here, they paid them 10 cents a crate.
There's so many of them.
There's so many of them. So it was, it's always been almost immoral how they have brought poor, hungry people to this area to work in agriculture, and they say, well, you know, we provide the nation's food. Well, that's true, but everybody makes out we get nice, cheap vegetables and fruits and all that, and the grower makes a nice profit, and the people, it's on the backs of the laborers that we do it. So anyway, you can take this, borrow this.
Awesome.
Your dad bought him a copy, I know.
Yes,
Everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I have a question about you personally. Like, so when did you work? Because I remember you and Granddad would have said some things.
Yeah. If you grew up here in the barrio as a kid, you know, they didn't have child labor laws that applied much to agriculture. You know, the unions had gotten child labor laws passed because they used to use kids in the mines because they were small, in the coal mines. That's why they used them, because they were
get into
small.
places.
Yeah, and there was no labor laws until, you know, the collective bargaining laws passed and all that, child labor. But agriculture, like I said, was never covered. So a migrant family would come, and the kids, you know, 7, 8 years old would be out there working in the fields too. So if you lived in the barrio, I mean, we were lucky because our dad had a full-time job, a good job, the railroad. I mean, the railroads saved a lot of Mexican families. There was a whole class of people. All my dad's friends were railroaders. My godfather was a railroader. You know, that was a whole culture. And they came to replace the Chinese who were brought over to build the rails to start with. Then they had the Chinese Exclusion Act forbidding any more importation of Chinese. And then the Mexicans started doing it about the time of the Mexican Revolution. So that's when my dad's dad came to work on the railroad. He went to Muskogee, Oklahoma first. That's where he was from. Yeah, Muskogee. But anyway, so our family was lucky that our dad had a full-time steady job with some benefits, right? But if you lived in the barrio, the trucks would come by in the morning to pick up the crews to go out and work in various things that were being harvested or what planted or whatever. And as a kid, your buddies were going, so you might as well go. And you got paid. And when I started, we were getting 85 cents an hour. That was the pay, 85 cents an hour. So, you know, as a 12-year-old kid working 10 hours, you know, you got some money,
This
you know.
was during the summer.
Yeah, during the summer.
Okay.
And we mainly worked in the grapes. And but the crews would come, the labor contractor, he had a contract with Jamaras or the Giorgios or the big grape farms. And it was up to him to get the crew together. So he usually had a truck, a big, bigger than a pickup, usually 2 sizes bigger than a pickup that would hold maybe 15 people in the back, right? And usually a canvas car over it. And then he'd go around the neighborhood and toot his horn twice. And then if you didn't make it, he'd drive off to the next place.
You jump in the back
So
of the
yeah,
pickup?
jump in the
Just
back
like
of the pickup.
all these
Yeah,
people in there.
jump in the back. And in the summertime, even in the summer, early in the morning, it was cold, you know, he'd sit in there. And then when he got everybody loaded, he would go to the ice house over there on Union. Had a big barrel on the back of the truck, kind of chained on. 2 barrels, one chained on and the other one was sitting in there. And he'd fill them full of ice, big blocks of ice, and then water. And then we go out to the field. Go to Arvin, Lamont, or Delano, that area. We liked Arvin and Lamont because the grapes were clean underneath. Delano was stickers and all. You could tell the difference between the fields. Because you'd be crawling on your hands and knees underneath the vines, right? So
You were cutting them off and
Well,
putting them in boxes?
this is why Caesar picked grapes. Because grapes require a lot of labor, a lot of hand labor. You know, you pick peaches, you pick plums, you know, you just pick them. But grapes, starting early, we didn't do that. They had crews, though, that would start in February and March, doing what they call the poda, the pruning. That took some skill. You had to know how to do it. And they would go out every vine, every field. They would what's the word in English? I don't know, poda.
Prune. You
Prune,
said.
yeah, prune.
Yeah. Mhm.
They would prune and tie the vines, because there's a stake in the ground and then with a T on it, about that high. And then the T goes about that far. And then the stake is about one right here and the other one at that wall. Maybe a little shorter. And then there'd be 3 wires on the T that would go from T to T. And then the grape plant would grow along the stake. And then the vines would go both ways. And then they'd prune them and tie them with this, you know, the kind of cord they used to tie. You guys don't remember the ice, big blocks of ice. Kind of a silky type of cord. But anyway, they use that to tie the vines. So that's a whole couple of crews, a lot of crews going out and doing that. But those are generally old veterans that know how to
Very
do
skilled.
the pruning. Yeah, with some skills. Then, in early summer, when we would start, we did what they call the girly. The plant, usually it's a little thicker than this, because you don't pick them when they're still too young, when they get older. Usually, maybe twice the size of this. And then you had a knife that had it was like, had a handle, and then a blade that went like that. The blade, it was the hollow in here, right? And the blade went like that. And then with this part here, this end of the knife, you would cut a groove around the trunk of the tree, all the way around. I love to do that. It just felt really good. And then you were through. You'd go to the next one. But that little groove had something to do with sugar content and fluid, whatever. It was scientific.
Yeah.
You could tell how old a plant was by how many scars it had, because it would heal over the next season, and you could tell how many times that had been done the girly to. Girly, I don't know if it comes from girdle or what, but they call it a girly. And you cut that groove around every plant in the field.
You're on your knees. You just
On your
crawl-
knees, yeah.
crawl someplace.
You could get up and walk to the
and
next
get
one and crawl, get down. So that was when the leaves were coming out and the little bitty bunches were starting to come out. And then scientifically that had something to do with the sugar content and all of that. So you had to do every plant in the field. Then when the grapes are, the bunches are grown, see, this is the bunch, and then it's got about, maybe 6 big loose, and the grapes are on there. And then in the center, there are grapes that grow down like that, and they're tightly packed. Okay?
Right.
Well, then this was the big part of the summer before the picking. You have to go through every field, and what they call deshojando, taking leaves off. You would make sure that every bunch was hanging down and not tangled in the wire and all that, hanging down nicely. And then you would pull off all the leaves underneath,
Growing out, under.
so you could see the bunch. So when you came ready to pick, you didn't have to look for it; they're hanging.
Okay, yeah.
But you also went in with clippers and you cut this part of the bunch off. That was gone. you cut all of that off.
You left the top.
And it just fell. And you would leave the big bunch like that.
Oh. Mhm.
That had a couple of reasons for it. One, that bunch, what was left was the size of the crate for packing.
Wow.
Okay, because if you had to pack it with that in it, it's all messed up. Second, because they're tightly packed, they would get mildew sometimes. That part would get mildew. And then, when you get rid of that many grapes, the remaining grapes are going to be bigger and sweeter.
Oh, because they're taking
Yeah,
all
because
the
you're getting rid of all of that. So these are going to be bigger and they're going to be sweeter. You go through every bunch in the field, in every field. And then not only do you cut that off, but that's so hot. You take the leaves off and you make sure that all the bunches are hanging. And if there are too many bunches, they want about 20 bunches on each side of the plant. And if there's too many, you just cut some off and they drop them. You go through the field and do all of that. And that lasts about a month doing that all over the southern end of the valley. These are table grapes, not wine grapes, table grapes.
Okay, yeah.
So then, when the picking starts, right, like end of June, early July, the first picking, you got to go out there and the crew chief will tell you, he'll get a bunch and you'll taste them, and they have a little gizmo, a little thing that reads the sugar content. You squeeze the sugar on the thing and it calculates, sort of like when you do your blood test.
Right.
It'll tell you what the sugar content is. It has to be at a certain level or the inspectors won't let it be harvested. So they'll get a bunch and you can tell by the color they're getting a little bit yellowish.
Oh, yeah. Nice
They're getting ripe.
Yeah.
And they give you one to taste, Dummy me, I used to eat them. By midday, I was being thrown up grapes. Instead of just tasting them,
Right.
I'd eat the whole damn thing.
Wine sip and spit it out.
Yeah.
Supposed to spit it out.
So they said, okay, the first picking, then you go, and that's what you would pick, what looked like it was ripe. If you happen to pick a crate and they weren't, the inspectors didn't inspect them, they'd dump them right out on the ground.
Wow.
Yeah, so and if you did that too often, they'd kick you out. It wouldn't work. So that, in those days, they had packing sheds in Lerdo and in Arvin and Edison over there. We would pick in big crates. And then the guys at Swamp, they call it, loading the big crates on the back of a truck, maybe 10 high, bunch of guys. Usually it was a football player from BC, they got the better jobs. And then we'd take them to the packing shed. Then there'd be a lot of women in the packing shed. My mother used to do it with Kuka next door, she was the floor chief. And they would go, and you set them up. I did that when I got back from Spain with my mother in Lerdo. I wasn't in the field, I was in the packing shed, looked out, loading up the crates for them in kind of a slanted thing, and then they would put them in the smaller crates for shipping and then clean them off, any dry stuff. And the inspectors always took people to see my mother's crates because they were always the best. They got paid by the crate, so she didn't make as much because it took her time. But it had to be just right. But they would always go and show hers because they were always packed well. But anyway, they didn't do field packing. They packed in the packing shed. Now they do field packing. Now they'll
right on the field.
Right on the field, you can see them.
I see the boxes.
So that would be the first picking. And that was hard because you just didn't pick everything you saw. In the second picking, everything was pretty ripe and you didn't have to worry about it. You picked the crates and you didn't pick everything, but you got it. And then that would be like in August, most of August. And then towards the end of August, first part of September, the third picking, you picked with a bucket. And they have big gondolas at the end of the rows, and you just dump the grapes in. They take them to make cheap wine
Oh.
with that
Okay, yeah,
last
with the last.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that starts in February, goes all the way to September.
Wow.
All that hand labor, see?
Yeah.
And that's why Caesar went after the grapes, because for two reasons. One, it required a lot of hand labor. And two, it was a luxury food. Nobody needs grapes.
Yeah.
So when he started the boycott, bleeding heart liberals were willing to give up grapes. You know,
Oh, yeah.
because it was a luxury food. You do the same with bananas if you were gonna. But he tried it with lettuce and it didn't work. People aren't gonna give up their lettuce, you know.
Wow.
They gave up grapes easily enough. But he tried lettuce boycott. Because if there's anything harder than picking grape, it's picking lettuce. Because it's all back breaking. You're on your bent over all day. But he just couldn't get the boycott go on because people weren't willing to give up lettuce. But anyway, that was the history of the origins of labor organizing in the valley. And then from there, he tried to spread it to Florida and other places. It didn't work. He didn't succeed anywhere except in California. So when I was in the legislature, we passed the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, which was based on the National Labor Relations Act, which gave them the right to bargain, organize, created a board to adjudicate labor disputes. Still exists. At the same time, they created a public employment board for teachers, public employees, and I was appointed to that board by the governor because I lost the election when the two laws were enacted. I was in the legislature when they were passed, but not when they went into action. But since I lost an election, everybody told Governor Brown, take care of Ray, you know. So he put me on that board, which was a good thing. But that is to resolve labor disputes by public employees. At first we just started with teachers and then they expanded it to include all state employees. Right? But the Ag Board, it still exists and it still adjudicates disputes, and the union, Arnie Rodriguez is Caesar's son-in-law. He's the president of the union. And they still try and they still have unions and all, but Caesar is a greater hero after his death than when he was alive. He was considered a communist here, and you read the article of his funeral, the Pope sent somebody, the Kennedys were there, governors, Jesse Jackson, everybody was there. The Board of Supervisors here did not even recognize his death. Not only did they not send anybody, they didn't lower the flag or nothing. They just like he never existed. The Kern County Board of Supervisors. Now they name schools after him, all that, but in his lifetime, both he and Dolores Huerta were just enemies, and because I was their friend, so was I. They accused me and Caesar of organizing guerrilla fighters in the mountains to overthrow the government. The King, that was the guerrilla training camp. When it was a tuberculosis place. Keene was. It closed down. The county owned it. Caesar wanted to buy it, and they refused to sell it to him. They wouldn't sell it to him. Some Hollywood producer bought it and gave it to Caesar for $1. Yeah, I mean that's how they got it, because
I did not know
they wouldn't sell it to him. Then this producer, unbeknownst to the supervisor, he bought it, and then he gave it to Caesar for $1.
Wow.
And then they started Keene up there, but because they were up there, in the hills, the city council and the supervisors here were convinced that we were training guerrilla fighters over there to overthrow the government. That was the early 70s, there was all kinds of stuff going on. And I guess they actually believed it, you think. But, the mentality of some of these people is so low that how did they think we were going to train some soldiers that were going to overthrow the American government?
That's
The
amazing.
jet plane.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was
Amazing.
So now the Union is more historically and as a part of history, image, but effectively as a union, they're really nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They should have 200,000 members now, and they've got about 20,000. Caesar's big mistake in the beginning. Labor unions, especially the skilled craft, carpenters, plumbers, all that, they have hiring halls, right? If you're out of work, you can go to the labor hall, the carpenter's hall, and put your name on the list, and then somebody is going to build houses and they need crews. They come and they take you off the list in order of when you signed up. That's the way they do it in skilled crafts. Well, Caesar wanted to do that with agricultural labor. And I talked to the growers, Javaras and all those people. I was trying to mediate, in between. And they said, it's crazy. They said, we can't use a labor hall in agriculture. They said, we have a field of melons, and by the time the first one gets ripe, it's got 15 days to pick the field, because by that time they start getting rotten. We can't wait for them to come, get a hiring hall and list of people. We call a contractor. He's out there the next day with 20 people picking melons. But the way Caesar wanted to do it, he wanted to run the union like skilled craft union, and you can't do it in agriculture. And he bombed out. It just didn't work. The growers then. They had signed contracts with them for 3 years, and as soon as they were up, because it wasn't working, they signed up with the Teamsters. The Teamsters were just kind of a mafioso kind of group. I talked to the head of the Teamsters union in this area. He was from out of town, but I had him at my office say, why you guys coming in here? It was got conflict. There were people killed and everything, competing with the United Farm Workers Union. I said, well, you guys are big, you got highway, truck drivers, casinos, you got all kinds of stuff. Well, why are you in here, trying to take the union away from the farm workers? He said, money. He said, potential 200,000 workers paying $40 a month dues. Looked me right in the eye and said, money.
Wow.
But that they didn't make it either, because the popular will was against them. They had a bad image. They weren't part of the AFL-CIO back then. Now they are, and they patched things up with the AFL-CIO. But they're a better union today. But they had a lot of Jimmy Hoffa, all that kind of stuff. Connected with organized crime and everything. So. Anyway, that's my story.
Well, thank you.
But I picked other things. We started picking cotton before the machines came home.
My dad said he did it for one day.
Yeah, no,
'Cause it just
they scratch you all up.
First,
The balls get dry when the cotton, and they're pointed and
you
sharp.
had to go fast.
Yeah, and we used to get $3 100 pounds. 100 pounds of cotton.
And cotton was nothing.
Yeah, and we had the cotton sacks. The grown men would have 20-foot long sacks.
Like tied around.
No, over their neck and between their legs.
And how old were you guys?
Oh, I probably at that time was probably 8 years old.
Wow.
And I had a small 10-foot bag. And you would pick them.
Drag it between your legs?
Yeah,
as you
between
walk.
your legs, and pick from both sides of the row and stick it. And then every now and then you stand up and shake it down. We try to put rocks in and stuff like that. They'd catch you. They'd feel, they'd catch you. They'd kick you out of the field. But we used to pee in the bag. Because the weight.
Yeah, right.
And they didn't want you to start picking early, right? Because the cotton is damp.
Oh.
and it weighs more.
Oh,
And then if you put it in the bag, it stays down.
Melty too.
So they want to wait till the sun was up for a little while before they would let you start picking. Well, we would go out early and pick almost in the dark while the cotton was still wet. And then we'd lay the bag down and lay on the bag and take a little snooze. They couldn't see you. Back then the cotton was really high. There's an expression that the Okies use, like when you're really having good luck, they call it shitting in high cotton. Meaning you could take a crap and nobody could see you because it was high.
Right.
So that was like good luck, you know,
Oh
you're
my
shitting in
gosh.
high cotton.
Wow.
But we'd pick the cotton wet and then lay the bag down in the middle of the road and take a little snooze. Then the sun would come up and the guys would come and set up the scale and all that. Then you slowly get up pretending you just got there. But yeah, but 100 pounds, $3. And you would go out there and then they'd have this tripod thing with a big chain on it, and then you'd fold up the bag and weigh it, and they'd pay you right there. They had cash and they'd pay you right there.
For each load.
Yeah, every
sure.
time you
Okay.
weighed it. And the winos would go out there, you know, work enough to buy a bottle of wine, and they were out of there. You know, they just got out of the first pay and they were gone. But whole families would go. In those days, you're working here, there's a black guy here, there's an Okie over there.
Wow.
You know, everybody. And in a way, it was a good thing. You had to feed your family. You could go out there in a day. You just went out to the fields and you could see where the trailers were, because after you weighed it, you had to go up on top of this trailer and empty it in the big old trailers. You would go out driving and you could see where they were picking cotton. All you had to do was get out and pick.
No paperwork,
No paper,
no
nothing,
documentation,
yeah.
just show up.
Nothing, just show up and work. So, you know, a family that was needy, they had to feed the kids. You know, they could find a way to make enough to buy a meal.
Right.
But then the cotton machines started coming in,
Yeah.
and before long, not only did the cotton machines take over, they switched the cotton. It's a different kind of cotton, and they defoliate it with chemicals and all that kind of stuff, so that the machine doesn't get a whole lot of leaves. But the cotton they grow now is different cotton. They just, you know, scientifically they came up with a cotton that's better for the machine, I guess. But California cotton was king, you know. They replaced the South in terms of cotton in the San Joaquin Valley. That was a big, big crop. Not so much anymore because it takes a lot of water, and that's why they switched to almonds, pistachios, and stuff like that. They used to do a lot of alfalfa. They don't do that much anymore because it takes so much water. So they switched to things that take less water. But agriculture and oil are our lifeblood here, and so it's always been an issue. There's always been poor people to do it. We've got big corporate farms. Up in Salinas, of course, you know, you've got different kind of farming.
Right.
They've got year-round harvesting. They
Yeah.
plant twice a year. They plant and harvest. And they got more of the specialty things, you know, the romaine lettuce and blueberries, all that kind of stuff, strawberries. Our things are either machine harvested or, except for the grapes, you know, well, like the almonds, you know, they're shaken out of the tree. The machine just comes and shakes the almonds out of the tree, and then they vacuum them.
Pretty easy.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my story. So
Did you have
whatever
more
you want to
questions?
know.
I'm good.
That's it. Awesome,
Yeah.
Tio. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to know anything else?
How old were you when you were picking the grapes?
Well,
Or
picking
whatever.
grape, I was in junior high, I guess, by then. It was before the earthquake in 52, so at 50, in 1950, I was born 38, I was about 12 years old, 12, 13.
What did you guys do for like food and water and
Oh, that was a
restroom?
great thing. My mother would make a lunch for us,
Oh,
burritos, I mean, a lot of food. We used to eat a lot.
that's good.
We used to eat a lot. And we'd all have snack in the morning. So she always made enough lunch Then you always saved a burrito for the trip home. I mean, like she'd make 6, 8 burritos. And then at 10 o'clock, you'd eat 1 or 2. And what I used to love is a pork steak. She'd fry a pork steak, you know, with a lot of butter and garlic
Oh, yum.
in between a couple of slices of bread.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was salty and chewy, you know, that was such a great snack.
Wow.
But then the bad thing about it, in terms of sanitation in those days, they had that big barrel for water, and back then they didn't even have Dixie cups when we started. They had a tin cup chained to the thing. Everybody drank out of the same cup, you know, all these.
Is that from the ice that you guys got in the morning? The ice water bucket?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the little tin cup was chained to the bucket, and so everybody used the same cup. Then they finally started bringing in little paper diptych cup things. Now they weren't even cups; they were little triangles.
Right. Yes. Uh-huh.
And so you know you could get something clean anyway and throw it away. But you didn't have a place to wash your hands. That was all the water there was. So when you were going to have lunch, I mean, you know,
Or go to the bathroom.
yeah, go to the bathroom.
Where was that? Just out-
In the grapes, you
Dig
always
a
went
hole?
backwards. You went to the bathroom backwards
You
because.
dug your own hole or just left it?
No, I just left it there.
Wow.
But you didn't go forward because you'd come
Because you'd
across,
come across it, yeah.
And then that's why they call it talking about shitting in high cotton. In other kind of things, if you were picking potatoes, there was nowhere to go. I mean, nowhere to hide.
Oh.
You know, and for the women that worked in the
Yeah.
fields, I mean, that was always the thing. If a woman was going to go, guys would run there and try to take a peek, you know. It's terrible. That's why my dad didn't like my sister to work out.
Yeah.
But if you weren't in the grapes, at least you had a place to hide out. And so, you know, in the plums or the peaches, you could kind of get lost. But if you were picking potatoes or tomatoes or onions, it was just a big old field, you know. You had to walk a long way to find the tree. Or hide behind the, you know,
Yeah.
couple of sacks of cotton of potatoes. But there was no place to wash your hands, right? So you had to eat your lunch. And then sit under the grapevine or whatever. Or if you were out in the field, potato field, sit right there in the middle of nothing, you know. The sun beating down on you.
Jeez.
Now, Caesar's got a lot of laws passed. Now they got to have porta potties.
Yeah.
They got to have washing facilities. And in Salinas, I see they have chairs and little sunbreak
Yeah.
things and all that. But back in those days, it was a community cup and no water for washing your hands.
Were there a lot of pesticides on the...
Well, yeah,
Fruits and
not
stuff?
only that, they sprayed, but this didn't hurt you directly, but they had these little troughs on the tees about every, you know, couple of 100 yards. They'd have a trough about like that with birdseed in it, poison.
Oh.
So the birds would come and eat and die right there. They didn't care what kind of bird, you know, bluebird, whatever, hawk.
Wow.
They didn't care.
Wow.
They didn't want the birds eating the grapes.
Right.
Yeah. So they poisoned them, and you come across, you know, all these dead birds, some old, some new, and you had to work, and they die right there where you're working,
Wow. Wow.
and they just poison them, kill them. See that the conscience of the growers, they can give a crap about, you know, anything, the environment, not only the birds, but
Yeah.
the workers.
Yeah.
You know, they're making their bottom line. You know, people don't. That never came out. You know, that was never publicized. But if you worked out there, you saw it. You know, you saw it. Yeah, and then of course there were a lot of hazards, snakes sometimes, and bees, the wasps. Man, I got bit one time right on the eye, and I looked like I'd been in a fight.
Wow.
I couldn't open my eye for 3 days.
Wow.
Bit me right on the eyelid. The wasp.
Yeah.
The old timers, they knew they'd take newspaper and they'd go and they'd shake and they'd go down the row and they'd shake, and if they found them, they'd burn them out. You know,
Yeah.
they'd make a torch and burn them out. Yeah, but there were a lot of wasps
Yeah.
in the trees, not honeybees, but
But they didn't
Wasp.
spray for insects?
yeah, they'd spray, but I don't know.
Not a plane that was just like walk through and just,
airplanes and stuff
they did
like
do
that.
airplane.
Yeah.
Okay. Not while you were working ever.
Well, sometimes they'd be spraying right next to a field where you're working.
Yeah, and the
you know,
winds.
and the wind just bring it over. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, different things had different effects. Like peaches were terrible, man. Peaches, peach fuzz. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it makes you itch. Ooh, God, it was terrible. I hated peaches. And tomatoes, you had to get all green.
Yeah.
So different kind of things had their hazards. Onions, you pick onions.
Oh God.
You pick big old onions, and you had these big old snips. And you had to cut the roots off and the top off. So that's all's left is just
Right.
the onion.
Uh-huh.
Well, all that onion juice all day, man.
Ooh.
At the end of the day, you couldn't get... We used to take lemons and try to get rid of the
Yeah.
onion smell. But if you had a date with a girlfriend, keep your hands in your pocket.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Different things.
Is that it, sweet?
But it's you know, agriculture is not going to go away. The issue here is water. Unfortunately, when Caesar started, he became an enemy of the labor contractors. They were Mexicans too. So there was a conflict between the labor contractors and the union. It was like a civil war. There were people Mexicans who liked Caesar and people who hated him. Mexicans who hated him. Because he was taking away their way of getting a job out in the
Right.
field with a neighborhood labor contractor,
Right.
you know. So the labor contractors were all Mexican. And they hated Caesar because he was going to be taking away their jobs. See, they got paid by the grower. He gave him, the grower gave the contractor a flat fee to work in the field, whatever he was doing. Then that was up to the labor contractor to hire the crew. Then he paid him out of his account. But it was a scam too. That's one of the things the union was against. Labor contractor charges for the ride out there every day. So you're making 85 cents an hour. Then he charge you $1 for the ride out and back. So, you know, take $1 off the 85. Then he'd say you couldn't bring your own clippers or your own knife because they wanted a standard cut or what, I don't know what it was. So you had to rent his clippers, you know, for 50 cents. You had to rent clippers from him.
From the contractor?
From the contractor. So all of that is deducted from your pay. And you know, he's making money.
And no one oversees
Yeah,
the
no
contractor.
one
He
oversees
can do
it.
whatever he
Yeah,
wants to
and
do.
you know,
Make his
he-
own rules.
He's charging whatever the going rate is. If you want to work with him, and he's saying it's $1.50 out there, and you got to pay the $1.50 because you can't show up in your own car. You know, he takes you out in his
Yeah.
truck, and that's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you get paid at the end of the day?
No, that was you got paid every week.
Mm.
Yeah, you got to check that because then the contractor, you know, he had his own account and he would calculate how much he's deducting. Yeah. So you know, it was kind of a scam that way.
How much would you make a week?
Well, I don't know. Calculate 85 cents an hour. We worked 10 hours.
$8.50 minus whatever you had to give him.
Then yeah, you give
Maybe
him
$48 a week is what.
yeah, something like that. But for a kid,
Yeah.
you know, it was all right. And then for me, it was like I'd give my mother half of it or something. You know, I didn't need it for school clothes or anything like that. One summer, at the summer of the earthquake, we had compadres. My mother was godfather to Ortiz children in Arvin. And the compadre was he ran a farm for a labor inspector who had some acreage, and he ran this farm for him. So we would work out there sometimes, picking cotton and stuff. But during the end of the summer for his vacation, he would contract with a raisin grape grower in Fresno area. Your dad went for that one. So he would contract, and he and his family, and there were a lot of kids, about 10 of them, Then we had the earthquake, and we didn't have a house to live in, and so my mother, my brother, me, and Patsy went with the Ortizes.
Mm-hmm.
And we went out to this guy's farm, and we had tents, and we put tents up, and we made tents out of crates. You know, and laid some crates down, put a sleeping bag, and then went up and put a canvas over, and me and the boys, you know, we sleep in there. And the women had a tent with little cots, my mother and the comadre, and they make food. But we would go out and pick raisin grapes. And that's the end of the summer. They're all really ripe, really yellow, ripe and sweet. And the the raisin grapes, in those days they used to use a big sheet of paper. And this was Patsy's job. Brown wrapping paper, about that big, like that. And they were sheets. And she would go and lay them in the middle of the field. Then we would pick in a crate, and then dump the crate on the paper. And then she would spread out the grapes, kind of, on the paper. And then they just let them stay there for a week or two, whatever, getting dry.
Right.
Then they'd come and pick them up and take them to the sun-made raisin place, wash them, do whatever they did with them. We got paid by the contract that he had for the farm, and we did that for 2 weeks. And we used to bathe in the canal. There was no shower or anything, but we'd go swimming in the big canal, you know. That was and it was like camping out for us, you know.
Sure.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And the food they'd make, you know, they'd make really good. The comadres, you know, my mother, you know, she was the cook. But it would be like, it was, like going to Yosemite or something, except we were working all day.
Yeah.
Then we were working all day in Fresno heat.
Yeah.
But we did that for 2 weeks. Then what the compadres would do, the reason they did that was, with the money they made, that's when they bought all the school clothes for the kids. For
Yeah.
Yeah, that was raisin grape. They still do it that way, except they don't use paper. I hear they use a plastic now or something.
Really? Wow.
Sheets.
Wow.
But that's a whole different process. I imagine they don't do. No, they didn't. They didn't tip the grapes the way we tipped them for packing. They just let the whole grape grow and get ripe.
Okay.
Yeah. But the table grapes require a lot of hand labor,
Right. Yeah.
almost year round. Yeah.
Very nice.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Little Pepita.
Boy, that's
I
enough
love
for a report.
Pepita.
I know.
She's a world's
Such a
best
good
lap
lap.
dog.
She is. She's great.